Thank you.
So since we just started recording, I'll just, I'm Heath Smith. I'm with Rogue Detection Teams, and somewhere on your screen, you'll see Jennifer Hartman, who's also with Rogue Detection Teams. We're going to be giving this presentation together, even though we're in separate areas. So we'll see how that goes. We're going to talk about conservation dogs and avian conservation this evening. And I think you can advance the slide, please, Richard. Thank you. What we're going to be talking about is we're with Rogue Detection Teams, which is a program that rescues dogs or finds dogs that are at rescues and pairs them up with a biologist or a handler or what we call a bounder. And we use these teams out in the field to generally look for endangered or threatened species, but it could also be a lot of other things, which you'll learn about this evening. Now, the dogs we adopt are very special in that they have one thing they love to do more than anything else, and that is to play fetch. And I'm sure some of y'all have met dogs like this where you throw the ball and 2 seconds later they're back and they want you to throw it again. And you throw it and 2 seconds later they're back again. These are the dogs that if you're not careful, they could actually harm themselves because they would play fetch until they basically fell over. And we have a few of those. They'll also eat through couches. They'll eat through chain link. They'll break car windows to get out and go after a ball. They have a very intense desire to play fetch. Even if it isn't a ball, if it looks like a ball, if it's a pumpkin, well, we could use that. If it's a pine cone, we could throw that. And if you don't play fetch with them, a lot of times they'll roll it down a hill and they'll go and get it and bring it back and roll it down a hill and go. So just to give you an idea of what type of dogs we're looking for. Now, all the dogs that we adopt are from rescues or shelters, or they're an owner surrender that's contacted, generally a shelter, and the shelter's directed them to us. A lot of these dogs end up in the shelters because they've turned to aggression, or as I mentioned, they've eaten the couch or torn the curtains off the wall. When they don't get out and have this release of playing fetch, all that energy builds up and it kind of makes them what we might call a bad dog. But they're not bad dogs. They're incredible heroes for us. So we search all over the US looking for these kind of unwanted, forgotten heroes, and we bring them to our headquarters and we teach them to do various things for us. A lot of that is generally, like I said, with threatened and endangered species and looking for their scat and getting a lot of information from that. But as we'll learn, there are other things. Now, the other half of this team is what we call a bounder. You may have heard the term dog handler before. We actually, the way we work with our dogs, it's a lot more communication and stuff, and we're not exactly handling them. We're connected to them. And we've kind of latched on to the term bounder, which is that's us. We're conservation field scientists. And the name kind of comes from the fact that we're bound to our dogs. They're the most important thing to us. They're our co-woofer out there in the field, and without them, we wouldn't be able to do the work we do. And then together, that makes a detection dog team. Now, the interesting thing here is it takes about maybe 30 seconds to 30 minutes to teach one of these two, and then it takes about 2 years to teach the other one. And if we could do a show of hands, I'd love to see how that worked out. But since the dogs have such a high desire to play fetch, it makes it really easy for us to teach them an odor. And if they learn that the ball is connected to that odor, they will literally search all day long to find that odor again, just to play fetch. And so that makes it very quick for us to be able to work with them. Teaching folks to do that, to work with the dogs, is a very difficult process because it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of dedication, and it requires the person that's learning to do it to invest a lot of themselves in it. This is more a lifestyle than a job. Now, when you're teaching somebody to to learn to communicate with a dog, we'll go out and we'll work with the dog and we'll set out some samples, and it looks super easy. And so everybody thinks, oh, wow, that's cool. I could do that. And then, they go out and they try it with a dog, and maybe the dog eats a sample, or it rolls in a sample, or it decides it's not going to listen and it runs off to do something else. It's not as easy as it looks. And it's almost like a magic trick in a certain sense, because when you see somebody do magic, it looks really cool and it looks really simple. But when you try to do it, there's a lot of things you don't see that are happening. And so it's really hard to do that magic trick. And that's kind of the way this is. When people start to learn how to do it, all of a sudden they realize, hey, there was a lot more going on that I just wasn't able to see. Next slide, please, Richard.
So hello, I'm Jennifer, and this slide I think is how you all learned about us. We were so honored that Audubon wanted to highlight some of the work that our detection teams were conducting in Southern California. We were based out of Palm Springs for 3 years doing wind facility work, and Heath will go into our wind facility work in a little bit. But this is just a slide to show you, while we've done a lot of detection work at wind facilities, our dogs also do a lot of other work. And so you can look us up on the internet, and you can see us in some magazine articles. We've been in Sierra magazine. We worked with Bat Conservation International last year, and they did a really wonderful article. We're starting to do some bumblebee work. So it's just really diverse what our dogs are lending a sniff to. You might notice in this picture a lot of cattle dogs. We do love cattle dogs. My personal working partner is Filson. He is in the lower right of your screen with the really cool goggles on. He's also the one in the Revelator, sorry, article there. But we don't just adopt cattle dogs. It's like Heath said, these dogs, they tend to be in shelters, and that's tends to be why we have so many cattle dogs. But we adopt dogs of many different breeds, from black labs to border collies, we even have something, we don't know what he is. He looks kind of like a papillon. We've had like a Chihuahua mix. So we don't discriminate on the type of dog. We just need them to be obsessed with fetch. And that's how we're able to connect with them to help us find this really elusive data. You can go to the next slide.
So as I mentioned, we do a lot of work with scat, which is also poop for folks that aren't familiar with the term. And with it, it's a lot of the work we do, we really want to be non-invasive. We don't want to disturb the animals. So with scat, we're able to get DNA from that. And we can tell if something's male or female. We can tell what species. We can tell if it's female, if they're pregnant. We can tell if they're sick. We can tell if they're related. And we also can tell from scat their diet. We can tell their diet, so what they've been eating. We can obviously get their location because it was left somewhere. And then we can also look and see if there's different kinds of parasites or things that are harming them. Now, along with scat, there's also toxins and viruses. So, I mean, everybody's familiar with viruses these days, but we were also doing work on, just to give you an idea, on cherry trees. So they've been kind of attacked from different viruses, and the dogs would be able to smell different leaves and tell us which ones were infected for that tree, which trees were infected. We also do rare and invasive plants. So a lot of times when there's invasive plants, we want to know where they're going to pop up so we can pull them out quickly before they kind of recolonize an area. But we can also find rare plants, which is also super, super helpful. Sounds like there's a little bit of feedback somewhere. And then moving over to the other side, marine wildlife. I'm not sure if folks have seen any of the dogs looking for killer whale scat, but that's some of the work that we had done. Yeah, so the dog actually rides on the bow of a boat and finds a whale scat that's floating in the water. Um, and then in addition to that, we look for live animals. Now, with live animals, like I said, we want to be as non-invasive as possible. So a lot of the live animal work is smaller things. So that might be caterpillars. It might be uh, salamanders. It could also be grasshoppers, but we don't do a lot of like, let's find a cougar, let's find a bear. We'll stick to just finding their poop. And then one of the other big ones we do, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is carcasses. And we've got a little wind turbine there. So we look for bird and bat carcasses at wind facilities to often test different types of deterrents that might reduce the fatalities that are happening on wind facilities. We may also, we'll actually have a one where we talk about eagle strikes in a little bit. And then we also look for carcasses from various carnivore kills. So, what are wolves eating? What are cougars eating? What are the bears eating? And things like that. Next slide, please, Richard. Oh, okay. So here we go into the wind facilities. Now we do wind facility work kind of all over, and it's very different work. You're looking for carcasses all day long, and a lot of times we're doing both birds and bats. The photos that you can see here are from down in from Palm Springs, but we do a lot of work in the Midwest as well. So when we're doing this type of work, you might think it's really easy to see a large raptor on the landscape, but you'll be surprised how often you can walk past something like that and not know it. And the dogs are extremely helpful because they can pick up things, half a mile away, depending on the wind. Usually we're not working a plot that big, but they can drag you all the way across the plot to find a tiny little bat, or even just a foot of something, because things get kind of chopped up sometimes. And it's incredible what the dogs will actually help you find. And then all of this data is super important, especially when we're looking at different ways to reduce those fatalities. Next slide, please, Richard.
So yeah, although you may have learned about us from the Audubon article that talked about some of the wind facility work that we've assisted, there's a lot of other ways that dogs can help avian wildlife. And so we're just gonna dive right into some of the ways. This is a dog I used to work, the love of my life. And you can kind of see faded there, a pellet. So that's a bit of a hint of where we're going with this. You can advance the next slide. So really exciting for me, at least. I'm actually an English literature major by background. So how did I find myself into this field? Biology is a very competitive field, and I learned kind of about it later in life. And one of how I kind of launched my career was through Student Conservation Association, which was an internship I did right out of college, and I was studying the northern spotted owl. So I did this for 3 years. I loved it, but the study was coming to a close, and I thought, oh no, like no one's going to give me a job. I'm an English literature major with 3, summers of spotted owl work, underneath me. Where am I going to find a job now? And I should back up a little bit. How I was working with spotted owls was hooting. So some of you may know, but if you don't, the protocol to survey for northern spotted owl currently is to travel to various call points throughout the forest late at night and in the early morning and hoot, because spotted owls are one of the few species that will respond to playback. And this was actually so long ago that we were just doing it vocal. So we would actually use our own voices for this. So fast forward to, my internship's coming to a close, and I'm really hoping, to stay in biology. And the woman, the researcher that I was working with, Dr. Lisa Hayward, suggested, well, why don't you work with dogs for spotted owls? Because, I know someone who's interested in learning whether or not dogs might be able to assist. And this was right around the time. So this is about 15 some odd years ago, but this was right around the time where a new threat was emerging for the spotted owl. And it was their very close cousin, the barred owl, but it was moving from the East Coast. So it's a non-native species, and it was coming to the West and kind of taking over spotted owl habitat, but they didn't know quite how bad it was. So they needed to kind of learn some more information. And the thing about barred owls is that when they take over a spotted owl habitat, it sometimes causes the spotted owls to be quiet. So now this really wonderful way of serving for spotted owls just by hooting for them was becoming, in a way, obsolete. And if we weren't able to count them via their vocalizations, then what if, a habitat over the course of 3 years had no spotted owl calls that might be able to come up for logging? So there's a lot of concerns that biologists and researchers had with this new threat the spotted owls were encountering. But enter the dogs. And at this time too, not a lot of work had been done with detection dogs. It was still a fairly new field. Like Heath mentioned, we were kind of well known for some orca whale research we had contributed to, and we had been doing some predator work. But this is one of the first instances of dogs being utilized to find pellets. And you might be like, pellets? Isn't that literally like a needle in the haystack? How are you supposed to find in a great big forest, a single owl or an owl's habitat or territory? But that's what's so brilliant about the dogs, and also being having my background in knowing and studying the spotted owl for the 3 years previous. I was able to, as the second observer in this detection team, assist my canine partner. I knew what spotted owl habitat looked like. So we could walk into the forest and I could kind of gear the surveys towards really ideal spotted owl habitat. Meanwhile, my partner, Max, was using his nose to help lead me to the pellets. And what's really exciting is that sometimes when Max sniffed for pellets, there's actually an owl in the tree. And you can see in the photo to the left,
Hi.
this is one of my favorite photos. And it's just magical because we weren't using our voices to call them in. And that's the other thing I love about working with dogs is, like Keith was explaining earlier, it's non-invasive. So if you think about a barred owl, and it might be threatening the spotted owl and making the spotted owls go quiet, they're very nervous. They don't want to call. And so calling for them can actually cause some stress. And so in this way, we were able to find data on spotted owls without having to call them in. And I just love that aspect of this work. So yeah, this, even though it's a kind of a blurry photo and it was taken pre kind of cell phone days, it's still one of my favorites. And the one on the right, I took actually in the field prior to working with dogs, but those are some two spotted owl fledglings. They're adorable. So I actually got my start in this field via spotted owls and bird work. And I just love that, like we were talking about at the beginning when Marianne introduced us, that we could combine two loves, dogs and birds. So you can advance to the next slide. And this research, so I'm really excited. It's kind of a nerd moment, but this research was published. And this is really special for me, once again, because like I said, I'm an English literature major. I didn't have a science background. So this was one of the first times I got to see my name as a co-author on a publication. And we had really hoped that this research would help provide biologists with another tool in their tool belt to help curb and stem some of the threats that spotted owls are facing, because I think, as we all know, they're facing a lot. Some of the really neat findings from this research Like I said before, spotted owls are quieter when invasive barred owls move in. And if this might be common knowledge to some, but if it's not, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Protocol requires 6 visits by human surveyors to do the vocalizations. Dog teams, we did it in 3, and we would survey marginal habitat and really good habitat. So we had 3 visits, and we were not calling at all. And we did a direct comparison between the protocol, the human surveyors, and the dogs. And in all instances, the dog teams determined presence or absence, whereas for the human teams, even with their standard 6 visits, at times they never heard the owl that the dogs found the pellets from. And this was just really exciting. We didn't know this till the very end either. We even though it's a concurrent study and we were going to the same sites, we did not know until the pellets were analyzed that in some cases the dogs were finding owls that the humans did not. So again, to reiterate, one of the things I love about this is that it was less disturbance for these spotted owls. We did not have to call them in, so they did not have to advertise to the barred owl that they were there, which could potentially cause, especially during nesting season, some ramifications for the spotted owl. So yeah, my nerd moment. This is how I got started in this field. And so you can imagine when we were approached by Audubon to share about some of our work, I was just like, oh my gosh, I finally get to talk about it. So anyways, everyone can read the research article if you want, but NPR also did a little piece about it. And there's some other things you can look up on, just look up spotted owls and detection dogs, and you might see my name. And Max's name, so you can advance. So fast forward many years later, now dog teams are a little bit, let's say there's a little bit more confidence in using them, but it's still very much an on the edge research methodology. There's still a lot of nervousness or doubt or skepticism. And so that's why you may not see as many detection dog work with avian conservation. But what's really exciting, and it's pretty up and coming right now, we're not the only team. Another way that dogs are assisting avian wildlife is with seabird burrow nest searches. And I was thrilled to be part of a project with the Haida Nation in British Columbia. So for the early comers, you may have heard us talking to Richard. He thought we just worked in Washington, but we actually work all around the world. And one of our international projects was conducting storm petrel surveys in British Columbia. And so we flew to an island, and then we had to boat to another island, and then we had to camp on that island and then boat to another island. And these were all uninhabited. And the hope was that dogs could assist researchers in finding active burrows. So if you think of a colony, a seabird colony, and storm petrels are about the size of a robin. So they're very tiny, and they forage out on the open water. And they often fly out at night or in their early morning. So you can't really see how many are in a colony. And many of these islands where these seabirds, not just storm petrels, but seabirds in general, have their colonies were affected by the shipping industry and having invasive rats come onto the islands and kind of decimate their colonies. So storm petrels up in British Columbia is one of the species of interest, and they're hoping to learn more about, like, okay, is this a rat-free island? and what's the population of the colony, and can we start reintroducing storm petrels to other islands. So our role as the detection dog team, those are Scooby's paws right there next to an eagle skull he found me on the island. So eagles are killing the petrels as well, but that's just an aside. We had two goals. We needed to find presence of rats, as well as help find active burrows. And with the active burrows, the current way that they are finding burrows is by literally searching every single hole with a burrow scope. And if they find one, they have to basically dig it out. And that's not really great for the burrow. That's not really great for the bird. And you can imagine that it's quite invasive. So if we can, once thing you can go back to the beginning of our presentation when we talked about how detection dog teams are a non-invasive method, dogs are able to tell us, hey, this burrow is active, this one isn't. You don't need to spend more time in this colony than is necessary stressing these birds out to, collect your information, and we can move on. In this particular instance, we did not have that much time. We only had a few days, but this is being done all around the world. So I think it's definitely a way that dogs can assist avian conservation. And if we go to the next screen, I hope we have a video I can show you. Let's see if it will play. Well, that was a little choppy, but hopefully everyone saw. This was my co-woofer, Scooby. He's no longer with me, but he was dear and will always be dear to my heart. We worked on projects in Africa to Cambodia, on everything from African lion to tiger. This was his last project. And so he flew with me to British Columbia and went on boats. We chose him specifically, even though he was at that time around 14 years old, because he's very gentle, and he has absolutely no interest in wildlife other than if it's an odor that means he gets his ball. And you can kind of see the flag on the left there. This was a known burrow, so this was during our training exercise. And what we would do is bring him to an area where we knew there was a petrel in the burrow, and just give him his reward, which was his ball. And you can kind of see some other burrows behind him. Just to give you an idea, I can count 4. So that's why they need dogs. And if you imagine, people on their hands and knees trying to dig through these burrows, it's very disruptive to the colony. And the other thing, if you've ever been to a seabird colony, is that it's overwhelming with odor. I mean, it's just saturated. And so the other thing that we were helping with Scooby at this time was to get him used to, okay, you smell storm petrel everywhere, because they have a kind of an oil secretion. It actually smells very sweet and good, if I if I don't say so myself. But when you go to these islands, it just smells like that everywhere to my human senses. But for the dogs, they can parse through all of that and they can find the active ones. But we first have to teach them what it is that we want. We don't want this exercise, which is shown, like, we don't want all of the storm petrel, odor. We just want the most fresh that we can find. So yeah, you can advance.
While I'm advancing to the next slide, excuse me, I'm showing your video again. I wanted to ask people who tuned in late to mute their microphones. I'm having let's try, there we go, okay.
Thank you. And actually that video played a little bit better the second time, so I hope everyone got to see that. So in addition to the storm petrel work, like I said, we were doing invasive rat work. And so a lot of what detection dog teams can help with birds is indirect. So we may not be needing to find the actual bird, but we might find something that will then help these birds. And that's kind of what a biosecurity dog is. They work on the front lines of uh, and a lot of these fragile environments, helping to find things that are affecting them. And if you think of island communities, there's a lot of ground nesting birds that are at risk with a lot of the invasive plants, animals, or diseases that humans might have brought in historically. And so some of our work, like I said, on this island was to help find any rat dung or feces. And thankfully we didn't. So that might mean that some of these islands can finally be recolonized. But it's just really exciting. I think some dog programs, and we'll get to this in a little bit, they only do biosecurity work. So whereas Heath showed you all the things that our rogue dogs do, from live animals to diseases and viruses to marine wildlife and birds, there's some dogs who this is the only thing they do, and they're protecting our island ecosystems and birds every single day. You can advance to the next slide. I think, Heath, you were going to talk about some of our raptor surveys.
Okay, I can jump in. So we also do surveys where we look for pellets, and this kind of goes along with what Jennifer was talking about with the spotted owl work as well. So we could go out and we could look for spotted owl and barred owl pellets. Another species that you all might be familiar with is goshawks, and they're very susceptible, just kind of like the spotted owl, to disturbance. And we can go out with the dogs and help locate where they're nesting, or a lot of times even find where the young have not survived, unfortunately. So going out to these nests, you can find out a whole lot of information with the dogs. They find things that you just wouldn't expect them to always find. And then also for small little bitty owls like the saw-whet, with teeny tiny little pellets, the dogs can be super helpful in locating them. And then of course, as in the photo there, the beautiful great gray owls. And all this data can be collected, just like with SCAT. A lot of times you can get obviously the diet from what's in the pellets, but you can also get DNA from those pellets. And then of course, the location of where the individuals are. Next slide, please. Switching gears a little bit, this is a study we were doing with Hawkwatch International. And here we were looking at, this was a little different. We were helping them collect data on eagle strikes along corridors along the road. And what this entailed was using the dogs to actually find anything that had been hit by a car, basically. And you know, as you're driving, sometimes you may see roadkill and stuff. I've seen a lot of roadkill, but I was shocked how much roadkill is just off the road that we don't see. And there's a lot of it. And so what generally happens is a deer or something larger will get hit, and it'll get off the road just a little bit. And then the eagles will come to feed on that. And then when a semi or something comes through, it kind of spooks them off the carcass and they fly up, and then they get struck by the semi. And so it's a very important thing to look at and consider. I think the U.S. Fish and Wildlife says around 500 and something golden eagles a year are killed through various strikes like this. We were hiking some really remote areas through Utah, and I think some of it was in Idaho, actually. Jennifer might correct me.
It was Wyoming, Utah, and Eastern Oregon.
Oh, okay. Well, there's some great roads in Idaho we should have done.
Next time.
But we were out, and it's a very even though you're remote, these highways have some heavy traffic and very fast traffic. And working with your co-woofer along the side of a highway is a bit of a scary spot to work. But we found a lot of roadkills, and we're able to provide a lot of excellent data for researchers to kind of think about this and think of ways of reducing eagle strikes along these corridors. Next slide, please. was this one you or me, Jennifer?
Oh, I can talk about this one. That's a really cute photo of my detection dog, Filson. Found a nest, bird nest on the ground, and it has nothing to do with research, but I just love that he's so curious, and he can lead me to other things, and I'm just so curious too. So I this just seemed like a perfect picture for this.
Let,
But
no,
oh, go
let
ahead.
me just see something. Since we've been doing the wind facility work where we are looking for bird fatalities, a lot of times the birds, so the dogs are really taught to find kind of 3 different odors. The first odor is decay, like the bacteria from a carcass breaking down. And so that allows them to find birds, bats, grasshoppers, dragonflies, anything, mice that are out there, snakes that are dead. But then along with that, they also learn the odor of bat and the odor of birds. And so we actually have to teach them those different odors. And some of that work is done with live bats or really fresh bird carcasses. But the reason this is important right now is what's happened is, since our dogs have been doing that work, they've started locating ground nesting birds when we're out on other studies. And it's really the cutest thing, because they'll find these nests that, you would never see in a million years unless you were actually following the bird. But they're just very gentle, and they find it, and they don't give the same cue as they would for something they're going to get rewarded on, but they want you to come over and take a look at it. And then, we try to move on as quickly as possible so we don't disturb them. But that's something I think the dogs would be wonderful at in the future. Go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry.
Oh no, that's a great point, because we're just about to talk about the future of non-invasive detection dog surveys and avian conservation. So you can advance the next slide. So we just thought it might be fun to talk about just a few of our other projects with wildlife that fly. And in case this is interesting to anyone, because I do think the more I've done this work, the more I realize, even though we might be looking for a specific wildlife, it might be an endangered species or a rare species, that you often have to take an ecosystem-wide view. So it's no longer just about the species. So for example, when we are doing Taylor's checker spot or Oregon silver spot butterfly larva work, and that means our dogs are actually finding larvae tinier than a grain of rice. We're interested in learning about this pollinator species, but what do pollinator species do? They assist in the health of the entire ecosystem, and these are ecosystems that from birds to mammals, they all depend on it. And I love that dogs are able to help us figure out, okay, why isn't the Taylor's checker spot in this ecosystem, and what does that mean ultimately for the species that might depend on the Taylor's checker spot, or the plants that the Taylor's checker spot depends on. I mean, there's so many questions that we can start answering when we start to think about some of the ways that dogs can help lead us to information that we wouldn't have thought about before. So yes, some of our work is with butterfly species, and we're also starting some bumblebee nest searches where if you know, in the West, at least, the Western bumblebee and the Franklin's bumblebee are 2 species of interest with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the hope is to help find out what is happening to these pollinators and what does this ultimately mean for these ecosystems at large. So in addition to our wind farm work for mortalities and all the other bird work we do, I really do think that there's a lot that detection dog teams can help with. You can advance. And to go back to some of the biosecurity work we were talking about before, it's not just our group. And so while we're completely honored and humbled to have been invited to speak, one of the other programs you may have read about in that Audubon article was Conservation Dogs of Hawaii. And so they're doing a lot of fabulous work, at one facilities, but also with seabirds to help find down seabirds, but also the burrow searches that I was talking about before. So when we did our burrow searches, we actually reached out to Conservation Dogs of Hawaii to say like, hey, can we learn from you, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel if you learned something really fabulous. And there's a really great community with these dog teams around the world. You can advance to the next slide. So if you're interested in learning about some of the other programs, there's another program, Muscle Dogs, and they are actually starting to look for marbled murrelet nests. And obviously those are really high, tall in the trees. So one of the things that they're not actually looking for the nest itself, also because they don't build nests, they're just on ledges. But if they can find broken eggshells or feathers or scat, this can also help researchers trying to find out about the murrelet, because it's another species that's incredibly cryptic and it's very challenging for researchers. And they're just trying to find any tool that might help them learn more about various species like the murrelet. You can advance. And we love this group. That's Sammy. He works with the South Atlantic Biosecurity Detector Dogs. And he helps sniff shipping containers to look for rats or other, naughty things that should not be going to islands that are now rat free. And it's very special and important that Sammy and the rest of his pack are on some of these shipping, on some of these ships to help search just everything from luggage to food items to just make sure that these islands remain rat and rodent and other invasive species free. So we really thank Sammy for his work all the way in the South Atlantic. And you can advance to the next slide. And another program that we love, we're actually going to get to see her coming up in a day or so, is Louise Wilson from Conservation Canine Consultancy, all the way in the UK. She helps teach teams around the world to do various work, and she's helped with biosecurity dogs who actually worked on Sir David Attenborough's ship that travels the high seas and does some really fabulous research. So kudos to some of these other dog teams. You can advance. And if you want to learn more, there's just so many out there, we can't help ourselves, but basically just look up detection dogs and biosecurity, and you can learn about these dogs around the world. This particular dog works in New Zealand, and they do a lot of kiwi work. So kiwis, as you know, are a ground nesting bird as well. And New Zealand, I actually studied abroad there. And one of the things I learned is that there's a lot of invasive possum and feral cats. And so these dogs, you'll see in the next slide, but these dogs will not only help find the kiwis to help them. And if you advance to the next slide.
This is the little blue penguin.
Oh, sorry, there's a little blue penguin, but they also do kiwi work, because then these guys, these Jack Russells, and I actually don't know the breed of the other one, they will actually find the rats as well. So you have our program that does a lot of different odors, and then you have some of these biosecurity programs that might just do a single species. And for example, these dogs will just help find these rodents to make sure that these areas stay rodent free. Sorry about the little blue penguin. They're very cute. They're very tiny, but they're also ground nesting. I did a thing with a yellow-eyed penguin in New Zealand. So New Zealand's just fabulous. If you haven't gone, please do, and learn about these dogs doing really important work over there. And next slide.
Yeah, these particular dogs are bred for ratting too. So those guys are doing their natural thing.
Oh, they love it. And they're perfect at it, right? And I think a lot of people are worried, oh, don't your dogs chase wildlife or harm wildlife? And for the work that we do with rogues, No, that's not our objective. But what's really great is that for some programs, they actually want to lean into that hunt drive, and they actually utilize it to help them protect birds. So you can have a little bit of both. It really just depends on the objective of your research or your goal. But I don't want to take up everyone's night completely, but if you want to learn more about us specifically, we're on all of the major social media, and we try to share about our work around the world. We share fun videos, we share goofy commentary. If you like dogs, then come join us on there. And yeah, you can advance to the next one, because we just want to say thank you so much for inviting us. This was such a pleasure, and I'm really glad I made it out of the field today to get to join Heath in chatting about our program. And Heath, don't let me steal your thunder. I don't know if there was any last words you wanted to say too.
Thank you. No, it's been a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, we've certainly enjoyed it. I am going to stop sharing, and I think Marianne has been collating the questions. Have you been working on that?
Yeah, I've not seen a lot of questions except one from Deidre, and she was asking if you guys had done any work on the Farallon Islands up in Northern California in the Bay Area.
We have not. If she knows about Detection Dogs doing work there, that might be another program called Working Dogs for Conservation. They're based in Montana, and they also work around the world. So they assist in many of the similar projects that we do.
I also wanted to ask, do biosecurity dogs help detect illegal exotic animal cargo on ships?
Oh,
other things?
that's a great question. I didn't touch on it, but there are anti-poaching dogs and illegal wildlife tracking dogs. And you're completely correct. There are dogs that are stationed at various ports that will help find, sadly, bird eggs or turtles or rhino horn and other products hidden in luggage. It's just incredible what they can find. We actually were doing a pangolin scale, shark fin, rhino, and I think ivory in container work right before we started rogue detection teams. So there's just a lot of versatile ways that detection dog teams can help wildlife.
Yeah, I was also thinking about, the work that the Committee Against Bird Slaughter, or CABS, does right now. I've been following them, and we contribute towards their work, but I would think using, dogs with the nose would really help them, because basically they're just having to thrash through the bush and hope that they find the poachers.
Oh yeah, and some dogs, that's our dogs are more air scenting, but there's tracking dogs who do a lot of anti-poaching work, like actually apprehending the poachers. But something you said reminded me, one other way that I really feel like detection dog teams could help, specifically avian wildlife, but wildlife in general, is the rodenticides. There's a lot of poisons in the environment that are very harmful when they're ingested. So when you're putting out rat poisons, for example, or at illegal pot farms, sometimes they will keep their camp, free of wildlife to not draw in any attention to their activities. And let's say a small, mammal eats it. Well, then, the vultures are attracted to coming to eat that. And before you know it, that's in their system. So there's a lot of really awful and sad ways that things, like I said, ecosystem wide are being affected, that I feel like if we could do we want to do like a coyote scat project where we would look at rodenticides, and you could also look at their diet, and you could learn, okay, what is the prevalence of rodenticide in this environment, and what is the effect that it's ultimately having up the food chain. So there's just a lot of really diverse ways in that dogs with their those sniffers could help.
And that was, yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking DEA might be really interested in you. Yeah.
So I had a question or two. You talked about training your dogs for multiple scents, and I don't know how many you can train. And I was kind of curious. Well, can you say no, not rats today? We're doing eggs of this bird, and be convinced that the dog isn't looking for rats. The dog is only looking for the one that you're intending for it to work, or maybe you're just you have it trained to a palette of senses or scents, and you say, oh well, that wasn't what I really had in mind, but keep going. Oh, move on. So I hope that was clear.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to shunt that one to Heath, though. He is a pro at this.
Yeah. So you can, when we first started, there were a lot of kind of misconceptions about dogs, like they could only learn 8 odors or something. We've had dogs like Jennifer's Scooby that you saw in the video. He knew over 30 different species that he could alert to from scat, but the same dog can also go look for a rare plant, or look for the pellets, or do live searches like Scooby was doing with the storm petrel burrows. So they aren't limited to just one thing. Now, the caveat with that is if we do teach them, say, rats and eggs, they're going to look for both. There is no off switch that we can just say when you're not looking for that today, because they have such high drive to find that odor to play ball, that you can't really just override that. You could, but not in a very positive way that I know of. So we wouldn't want to do that.
Kind of
So
what we
obviously-
do, though, if we don't need it, like Filson will still find pellets for me, for example, while we're on, say, a carnivore project. And I, as the handler, as the bounder, I choose to reward him because I think it's special. And I want to keep him on that odor. But another option that some other detection teams might employ is saying, leave it, or I don't want that. And they just stop rewarding for that. And the dog can learn, like, okay, well, I won't go out of my way to find that. And I'm only being rewarded for this. So in that way, it's just a different style of working. I like with that nest, I like rewarding for the things that Filson finds, because it helps me when I'm out in the field learn about the environment I'm in and the ecosystem I'm in. And I think it makes us a stronger team. But there are ways to say, like, okay, we're just not going to find that today, and they might still find it for a little bit, but eventually, they get the idea, like, oh, okay, you just want wolf scat today.
So, yeah.
Rebecca had a question.
Oh.
She asked if, we've all heard about snakes in the Everglades and the big problems there. Are the dog teams being used to detect snake and snake eggs there?
They are. There's quite a number of dog teams down there. We haven't worked there ourselves, but yes, there are dog teams down there. Go ahead, Richard.
No, that's fine. You had another thought.
Back to the other question we were talking about. When we're on the wind facility work, I mentioned that the dogs will find anything that's dead. So snakes, grasshoppers, dragonflies. Since they're learning that bacteria, the decay that's happening with the animals, what generally happens is you start out and they find you everything. But as Jennifer is saying, you'll say, oh, that's not really what we're looking for a grasshopper or a mouse. And then they learn very quickly, since they aren't getting the ball, to keep moving on. What I wanted to kind of highlight is this isn't like where we can show them an odor and then they go and look for that odor that day, and then the next day we show them a different odor and they go look for that odor. When they learn all these different odors they look for, they will continue to look for it until we kind of teach them that we're not going to reward for that anymore, like Jennifer was talking about. But for the most part, most of us do like Jennifer, and we continue to award for that sample, even though we may not need it, to keep them excited for doing the work.
So from your description of selecting dogs, it sounds to me like it isn't just by breed. You're selecting among the breeds that are known for high activity, high energy, got to be out there. You're selecting and at the extreme end of that. You're wanting the ones that are just over the top all the time. And it sounds like these are probably not good home dogs, or by sitting by the fire and watching TV with you. But I was wondering is, I look at active dogs and I say, nah, that breed probably isn't for me. I could not satisfy the drive that certain collies, for instance, have. They need to be out there doing something. But I'm thinking, well, maybe you could get something that was good for half a day and then they could come home and relax. But maybe you could comment on how intense you have to keep them going. Obviously, you have to take days off too. And what do you do with a dog that just is really driven all the time?
That's a really good question. And the simple answer is we don't take days off. We try to give rest days to the dogs so that they can, we obviously don't want to wear them out when we're doing research like this. And they'll cover, up to 40 kilometers a day looking for different things. So a lot of vets, when we take them in, they always comment on how kind of extremely healthy our dogs are, kind of like your marathon runners or something. Like their heart rates are so low. So yeah, when you're a bounder and you have a dog with this kind of energy, they, even on days off, they have to go out and they have to have a little bit of an outlet. We try to manage that so they're resting as much as possible, but there's always something that you need to be doing with them. And you're exactly right. They don't make great pets unless you're an extremely active person that maybe works at home and can handle that kind of intense energy.
I will say though, one of the most, I would say, rewarding and tangible parts of our work in wildlife and conservation is, although we hope we're having a positive effect for wildlife, a lot of this takes a while to be, the data collected, the data analyzed, and then the data published, and then management plans. So you're looking at several years between when we're actually on the ground doing a project to seeing any kind of effect come from it. And so the single most fulfilling side of the work, at least for me, is when we bring a new dog in. And we've actually had dogs who were slated for euthanasia before, and we were their last chance. And when we give these dogs this outlet, this opportunity, you completely see the dogs change. Their body build and structure, their mental state. And so what used to be a crazy, unadoptable, wild, rambunctious dog that couldn't make a human connection because all they cared about was the ball, you see a different side of them, and all of a sudden they are warm and loyal and kind and loving. And in that way, when they are out in the field and they hike for miles, like Filson just came back and did 10 kilometers in the snow, and he's currently sleeping like a little baby over and he can't wait to go out tomorrow. So they do calm down because we're giving them that outlet. And if we weren't giving them that outlet, they might return to some of the behaviors that are supposedly deemed unacceptable or destructive. But that's our job as the bounder, is to give them that outlet. And just a funny aside, behind Heath, little do you know, there's 6 dogs sleeping quietly, high drive detection dogs, and you would never know because they're all had their games for the day, got their dinner, and they're resting. So they can, you just need to give them that outlet.
We have in our family dachshunds, and Woody Davis wanted to ask if you've ever used a dachshund, because, oh my God, it's all about the nose, and they're driven, and they love to dig, and they're unstoppable. So,
Wow. No, we haven't. Heath, have we?
No,
okay.
Oh,
But that's amazing to learn. I mean, if there's a fetch obsessed one in a shelter, you never know.
Give it a shot.
Mhm. I mean, that's actually why we have our name as rogue dogs, is not only is this kind of a rogue method, meaning it's on the periphery of kind of traditional methods, we also adopt the rogue dogs of the shelter world, the dogs that I think people think of when they think of a working dog, probably think German Shepherd and Malinois. But what we like in our program is that, they can be any dog. We don't mind the breed. They just have to really, 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 really want to play ball. And that's how we're able to communicate with them for the science that we contribute to.
so I have one more question for you. How is your work supported?
Oh,
Are you a nonprofit? How does this work? Who funds it? How do you get new projects? That sort of thing.
that's a great question. We are not a nonprofit. We started right when COVID hit, which is a terrible time to start a program, even though we've been doing this Keith has been doing it for 2 decades, me for about 15 years. But when we launched Rogue specifically, it was COVID. And so we were told there's a huge backlog on new nonprofits becoming, getting their legal status. So we're always in the field so much that we've just put that on hold, because we actually don't have a lot of time. I know that sounds silly. We're so small. It's just really me and Heath that we don't have time to do it. But who we work with in general, this can be a diversity of from agencies like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to the U.S. Forest Service. The work that we did in the Audubon article that many of the folks here might have read, that was with USGS and Bureau of Land Management. But we also work with universities. So some of our other work in Southern California is with the Sierra Nevada red fox. It's an endangered species. There's only about 30 left, and they're high elevation specialists. And we work with UC Davis and researchers out of the Ben Sachs lab for that. We've also worked with the Nature Conservancy. We're about to start a Washington ground squirrel project in Oregon, looking for this endangered species with the Nature Conservancy. And we've also worked with, Navy to World Wildlife Fund. So it's really diverse. It's really, if there's a question or a conundrum, usually we're called in last minute because they've tried everything else and they're like, well, maybe let's try the dogs.
Okay, so you can basically get individual contracts on the spur of the moment type of thing.
Very spur of the moment. I think one time we weren't sure if the work would happen, but the started in time, we just had to start the drive, and it was all the way in New York. And so we heard probably about in Montana or South Dakota that the project actually went through, so it was okay and we could keep going, but very spur of the moment, because when funding happens in the wildlife field or in the conservation field, it's all paws on deck, as we like to say.
Wow. Well, that's great. I really enjoyed your talk and really got a great inspiration about what you can do with imagination and some energetic dogs. That's fantastic. Really appreciate it. So I wanted to thank you anyway. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and we look forward
Thank
to
you.
reading more about your great work.
This is fabulous. We feel just so honored to be invited and to this community, and love to talk about birds. So I'm glad we got to nerd out with some fellow birders.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Sounds good. Thank you again.
Thank you.
thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Thanks a lot. Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.